Hey, how's it going? Ben here, and I wanted to talk today about teaching English in Thailand through the COVID-19 pandemic. So I wanted to share my experience with working in a school through the pandemic, what it's been like, what we've been doing. And I also wanted to potentially help you. Maybe you're thinking of, or you have been thinking of starting a teaching career here in Thailand as an English teacher, and you're unsure about what's going on. Are the schools still hiring? Can you get into the country? And a few more things. So we'll be looking at the COVID situation in Thailand a little bit. We'll have a look at that. I wanted to share my experience of what it's been like for me teaching through the pandemic. We're also going to discuss the possibility of finding work, if that's possible, during the pandemic. We'll talk a little bit about the routes into the country, so ways that international travelers can enter Thailand, because it's not that simple, as you probably are already aware. And we'll also talk a little bit about positive signs that we may be back on the road to normality. So if you're interested in any of those things, if you're an English teacher and you plan to start or resume a teaching career here in Thailand, let me help you with by sharing my experiences and what I know about travel and finding work and working during the pandemic. Let's start by talking about the COVID situation here in Thailand. So the first reported case of COVID-19 came in January 2020. That was similar to the rest of the world. However, it never really took off. The spread was largely contained. As of April 2020, so pretty soon after the first case, which was an international traveler coming to Thailand from China who had the virus. Following that, the borders were pretty much shut. So they shut in April 2020. They shut the borders to international travelers. So it was very difficult to come in and leave Thailand. The only people who could get in were returning Thai nationals, and some people who already had work permits who were out of the country were able to get back in. And that involved a quarantine of 2 weeks, 14 days in a specific hotel that were decided by the government. And they were working with the government to make sure people were staying in the hotels. They were being tested. You had to pay for this. You had to pay for the hotel. You had to pay for the quarantine, pay for the tests and all that. But if you were a returning Thai national, you had a Thai passport, you had to go through all this to get back in the country. And it was also pretty difficult and depended where you were coming from. There were definitely not flights from certain countries, but if you were coming from an accepted country, you already had the work permit and you were you could prove you were returning to the kingdom to go back to work, then there were some routes in, but it was extremely difficult to get into the country. International travel wasn't the only restriction. Domestic travel was advised against and sometimes banned from certain areas. There was also a curfew, so you weren't allowed out in between a certain time. And also restaurants and bars had to close down completely, and large gatherings were banned. These restrictions on travel internationally and domestic, and restrictions on bars and restaurants and ban of large public gatherings did keep the numbers very small in Thailand, especially in 2020. So it seemed on the news that the virus was spreading out of control in Europe and then America. Thailand didn't have that initially in 2020. The numbers were very low, and it's probably due to that emergency decree that was declared in 2020. Things started to change in April 2021, so earlier this year, around a year later after the first initial wave of COVID hit the world. It wasn't until April 2021 that numbers started to take off in the Kingdom of Thailand. And that could be due to the Delta variant. It seemed to be. The Delta variant did seem to hit Asia particularly hard, and the numbers started to rise in Thailand. Since April 2021, the schools have been closed, so that's affected us, the English teachers, and the reason why I'm making this video. So since April 2021, the schools have been closed. There's been a curfew in place since then. You're not allowed out past 10 p.m. or 9 p.m. Until around 4 or 5 in the morning. And that is varying in different cities. Different regions have had different restrictions. in the bigger cities, in the more populated cities with more, that traditionally have more international travel, there have been stricter measures. So places like Bangkok seem to be, as you would expect with the much bigger population, seem to get hit harder, and areas like Phuket. However, it does seem, and dare I say it, touch wood, it does seem that the worst times are behind us now, and things do seem to be slowly starting to open up. So I'm very optimistic, and it looks like the numbers are decreasing. We've flattened the curve, however you want to say it. It does seem. Also, the vaccine rollout is really taken off as well now. So we're seeing large groups of the population getting vaccinated, which is great, and we're also seeing the numbers of COVID fall, again great, and hopefully we'll start to see the restrictions lifted, and they are easing a little bit already. Let's talk about my experience teaching during the pandemic. As I mentioned before, the majority of schools have been closed since April 2021. Now that's meant different things for different schools and different people. So the majority of schools have closed down and been shut since then. Some schools were closed before that. Some schools have opened up and then re-shut down again due to COVID outbreaks. Some schools have created a bubble, so some of the more expensive international schools in areas with the higher vaccine rollout have begun, and this is quite new development, they've begun to open up in a bubble where your students aren't really allowed to go and see or leave the area or spend time with people from outside of the area, and so are the teachers. So they're trying to create like a bubble for the students and the teachers, and they're able to do in-person teaching. I'm not sure how effective that is. I don't know anyone who's been teaching like that. I just read an article online, so it could or could not be true, I guess. Most schools since April 2021 have stayed shut. I know some have tried to reopen and partially reopen in different capacities, but most have stayed shut. And that has meant that the majority of teachers, the majority of English teachers and Thai teachers and any other international teachers working in Thailand in schools have been teaching online using programs like Zoom or Google Meet or any other video communication portal. Even with teaching online, different schools have had different methods. Some schools, they've had to go into the classroom, the teachers have had to go in the classroom and teach online from the classroom. This has the advantage of being able to use like the whiteboard and any of the other props or resources you have in the classroom. More common is that you'll be at home, sat on your desk here, teaching on your laptop like this using the webcam. If you're wondering what it looks like teaching online at home, I made a quick clip in one of my classes that I can show you right now. Okay, so we have a picture. What can you see in the picture? What can you see? What is this? Aeroplane. So as you see, you'll be sat at your computer communicating to your students. You should have your workbooks and they should have their workbooks. You'll be using a program like Zoom or Google Meet, and you'll have some applications you can use. You'll have probably a virtual whiteboard and video sharing capabilities, so you can show videos from YouTube or videos from your computer. There are positives and negatives of teaching online, so I thought we could look at a few of those while we're talking about teaching online. The positives, in my opinion, are firstly, I find it way more comfortable working at home. So basically, wake up, make myself a coffee, do a little bit of prep, and then I'm in my office chair at my desk on my laptop teaching the class. Now, I'm quite fortunate. I have a desk and a nice comfy seat and some good coffee. Maybe you don't at home, so maybe that would be a negative for you. But for me, I'm way more comfortable at home. I have air conditioning in this room, and some of the classrooms don't have air conditioning. So yeah, for me, this is a big positive. I actually am way more comfortable teaching at home. With that, also, there's no commute. So I don't have to travel to and from work, which isn't a massive journey for me. Could be a long journey for you, I'm not sure. But even just the hazards of like the roads, not having to deal with traffic is great. Also, it's rainy season and I drive a moped, I drive a little scooter, so I don't have to deal with the rain while I'm driving to and from work on my scooter and getting drenched, which again, big positive, no commute. Also, you can incorporate games and videos online much easier in online classes. So yeah, it kind of lends itself to using videos more, using games, and you can actually find quite a lot of English and language skill games online. You can use PowerPoint, and I think even showing like a PowerPoint or a video is better for the students online because they have a screen in front of them, rather than maybe sharing one big projector, which may or may not be too good. Of course, there are some negatives, and some of those negatives include just the massive amount of screen time you're probably going to have. So with hour-long classes, maybe you have 3 or 4 or 5 hours of sat in front of a computer, staring at a computer screen. It can be pretty bad for your eyes, it can mess with your head a little bit and make you feel a little bit unwell. So I do dislike the increased screen time of teaching online. Also, online classes seem to take a lot more prep work. I don't know why. I think it's probably because everyone's watching. There's no like downtime in the class really. If you're going to set work in the textbooks, typically you'd give that at the end of class, because the students' one-to-one time is probably reduced with the online classes. So you tend to spend most of the time speaking, going through PowerPoints, maybe watching the odd video, and then asking questions. Trying to speak to everyone in your class can be quite difficult, and maybe it's just because it's newer to us all. So it does seem to be, or it seems to require a lot more prep work making the online classes. So that's a negative. And of course, you're going to have some technical difficulties every so often with online teaching. I've had a power cut during teaching a class. You have times when your Wi-Fi goes off, or you can't connect, or some of your students can't connect, or someone in the classroom has an echo and a feedback loop, and there's a terrible sound reverberating through the online class. So there are definitely some technical issues that need to be ironed out with online teaching. It's not perfect, and neither is your home setup, so your Wi-Fi won't be perfect all the time, and you'll have some technical difficulties. So those are the biggest negatives of teaching online. In terms of contract, pay, responsibilities, things are largely unchanged, apart from the fact that you're teaching online. So things like your pay, your salary should remain about the same. I've seen jobs advertised for the usual, for the average wage for native English speakers, so that would be around 30,000 Thai baht all the way up to 40,000 Thai baht. It's the same pay pretty much teaching during the pandemic. I've not seen any changes in pay. However, if you do teach a special class, which is extra class for bonus money that the school usually arranges, then that's not happening because of the pandemic, and because you're teaching online, you're not in the classroom. So actually you may notice a slight reduction, but that would be in the bonuses and some of the benefits that you get at working at some schools. So you may lose some of those. However, your standard salary will be the same, or it should be. And in terms of responsibilities, you'll probably find that they're the same as well, as you'll be teaching the same students online that you would be teaching in classroom. Most likely you'll be teaching the same students, the same classes, the same amount of students, the same people who would be with you in the classroom. It's just you're all online now, so it's pretty much the same. Alright, next I wanted to talk a little bit about finding work during the pandemic. So it is still possible to find work during the pandemic, as schools are typically running classes, although they may be online. Well, they're probably definitely online right now. What happens in the next few months is yet to be seen. But the classes are still being run, so that means there's still students studying English, so there's still a need for English teachers in Thailand at the schools who had English teachers and English programs before the pandemic started. So in theory, there should still be the same demand for English teachers in Thailand. And on top of that, there's a smaller pool of English teachers, as international travel is heavily restricted. Many people have gone home to stay with their families during the pandemic with the uncertainty of what was going on and what was going to happen. So maybe it's actually a good time to be looking for work as an English teacher, as the demand should have stayed about the same and the amount of English teachers in the country is reduced. However, that probably only applies if you're in the country already, as what I'm seeing online in job postings is that the school requesting that the teachers be in the country already. That's because of the restrictions on international travel. It's also to do with the uncertainty of what happens next. Maybe they'll get restricted further if the outbreak increases or decreases. Who knows what's going to happen in the future. So most of the schools are requesting that new teachers are in country already. In theory, the demand for English teachers should have remained the same. I said that before. However, I could see it actually decrease in some respects. Maybe plans for schools to increase their English programs or add new English classes. They'll probably have changed their minds and won't be doing that given the uncertainty and the financial repercussions of COVID. So maybe that's bringing the numbers or demand for English teachers down. Also, with online classes, it's possible to make videos and send them out. And maybe you can teach even more students in an online class. There's no physical limitations to how many students could be in your class anymore. So maybe some of the classes are doubling up and they actually don't need to hire new English teachers. Maybe they're okay with the numbers they have. I see it that not many schools are looking to expand right now. So maybe that will actually decrease the demand for English teachers. However, I'm still seeing many jobs being posted online, but you do typically have to be in the country to apply for those jobs. Given the majority of job posting I'm seeing are requesting that teachers are already in the country, let's talk about entering the country, entering Thailand during the pandemic. My understanding is that there has been routes for Thai nationals, people with Thai passports, and even some people with work permits and visas who are employed already. There have already been routes into the country for that group from specific countries and given certain routes, and that includes a 14-day quarantine in a government-selected hotel and tests, so you have to pay for all that as well, and that's quite expensive, quite time-consuming, and not available for many people. So it's only available for a small group, and that has been the case for a long time now, as international travel was pretty much shut down in Thailand for a long time. Things changed on July 1st, 2021, and that was with the opening of the so-called Phuket Sandbox scheme. So what that basically is a way for foreign travelers to travel to Thailand. So Phuket is essentially an island. It's a very big island and it's not that far from the mainland. There's a bridge. However, what they decided to do was to open it as a kind of sandbox. So people could fly direct to Phuket, travelers. You had to be vaccinated, so the requirements were quite a lot. You had to be fully vaccinated. You had to take tests when you landed. There was a quarantine period where you weren't allowed to leave your hotel. I think it was 14 days, maybe reduced to 7 days now. I'm not 100% sure, but you can find plenty online about the Phuket Sandbox, and you can research it and see what you need to do to qualify. But it basically meant people, tourists for the first time since shutting down last year, could enter the kingdom and enter via Phuket and stay in Phuket. After that quarantine time, after you've proven you don't have COVID, you've been tested multiple times, you have to pay for all the tests, you have to pay for a certificate to prove that you've been vaccinated, all that kind of thing. You have to apply for a lot when you're in the visa processing point, I believe. But once you've in the country, once you've been tested a couple of times, once you've finished your quarantine, you are then free to travel. That's my understanding anyway. And fortunately, that has been very successful. So maybe you could find a route to Thailand through the Phuket Sandbox. It's been very successful in that not many new cases have been brought in internationally because everyone is vaccinated fully, and because they have to do tests, and because they have to quarantine for 14 or 7 days, I'm not sure what it is now. There hasn't been much spread from the Phuket Sandbox, and what I believe is now happening is some of the other islands are being included. So I think Koh Samui, Koh Phangan, and maybe Koh Tao are becoming open to like sandbox visitors. Maybe you can fly there, or you can travel from Phuket to those other islands. It's been so successful that even some cities are going to gradually become involved in the scheme. So they're sticking with islands now. I think it's easier to police people's travel and restrict travel from the islands. So they're sticking with the island sandbox scheme. But in the in the next few months, if everything remains positive, then cities like Chiang Mai and maybe even Bangkok will be included in the sandbox schemes. With a route now back for international travels to Phuket, it does seem, touch wood, that we are starting to return back to some normality. One thing I have learnt during this pandemic is that my predictions are very poor, so don't take my word for it, but it does seem, the general trend does seem that we're returning to somewhat normality. There are easing of restrictions, which is great. The numbers seem to be on a curve now. They're not increasing. They're even maybe starting to reduce in some areas, which is again good. The vaccine rollout is also increasing week on week. It seems more and more people are becoming fully vaccinated in the kingdom, which is good for a return to normality. And hopefully we'll start to go back to normal very soon. Well, that's all I have for this video. Thanks so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. If you found this video useful, please hit that like button. Subscribe if you're an English teacher living abroad, or if you plan to be, because I make quite a lot of videos about that on this channel. If you think I missed anything in this video, please let me know in the comment sections, or you have any questions about traveling to Thailand and starting your English teaching career, let me know in the comment sections and I'll do my best to answer those questions. I do enjoy hearing from you. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully see you again next time. Goodbye.